Okay, so good afternoon, everyone joining us live. And as always, good morning, good afternoon, good evening if you are watching the recording of this webinar, which is going to be really discussing a functional medicine approach to endometriosis. Now, the things that we are going to cover today are really the risk factors and the current theories in regards to what causes endometriosis. We'll talk about the signs and the symptoms. And the focus of today's webinar is discussing some of the underlying imbalances that have been detected and that are discussed within the research. And the second half of today's webinar is very much touching on possible therapeutic interventions for all of these underlying imbalances that may be present. So many of you, I'm sure, have a sound understanding of what endometriosis is, but for those of you that don't, it is a chronic estrogen-dependent gynecological condition, and it affects around 10% of reproductive age women. But that prevalence does go up to between 20 and 50% in women who have pelvic pain or infertility. Now, there are different theories in regards to what causes endometriosis, but by far the most widely accepted one is related to retrograde menstruation. And the idea is that the uterus is not sterile. It wasn't that long ago that we thought it was, but really every part of the body, some will argue, has a microbiome. So the idea here is that the refluxed menstrual content carrying bacteria might contribute to inflammation and help establish and also help grow endometriotic lesions. So we start to see that there's a microbial and an immune component to the condition. But interestingly, according to the research, 90% of women experience retrograde menstruation, but only 10 go on to develop endometriosis. So there have to be other factors involved here. And in the research, things that get discussed range from anatomical factors to genetic factors that might predispose us to the condition. There are numerous environmental factors that we are going to discuss, as well as lifestyle factors and menstrual cycle dynamics as well. And because we now understand that the immune system has a key role to play within the condition, aberrant immune responses, whether that's related to genetic predispositions or potentially to lifestyle factors, are going to be involved here as well. But in this paper that got published this year, looking at endometriosis, a disease with few direct treatment options, the authors discussed how, again, the most widely accepted theory is in regards to retrograde menstruation, but there are 4 other potential causes of endometriosis. I'm not going to go into them today because, in all honesty, they're incredibly complex. They're not the general consensus, and I don't think it changes necessarily how we are going to consider therapeutic interventions and the underlying imbalances that we are going to discuss. But I did want to highlight that there are some other theories out there. It's also scary to appreciate that diagnosis can be significantly delayed. It can take approximately 3 to 11 years. And this is for various reasons, including the fact that I think it's around 25% of women can be asymptomatic. Now, just very briefly touching on conventional treatment, this obviously can include surgery, it can include conventional medications, and between those 2 interventions, that really sums up this long-term comprehensive individual treatment. But it's important to appreciate that there's a high recurrence rate of up to 50% within 5 years of surgery, which really shows us that the current conventional paradigm for treating endometriosis is not particularly successful. And that's because it's not really addressing the underlying imbalances that might be contributing to the condition in the first place. Those underlying imbalances continue to go on, and as a result, we may need additional surgery, as this statistic shows, potentially within 5 years. So let's dive into what are the risk factors that we're aware of? What are the actual signs and symptoms that might suggest that investigation is needed? And what are the associated imbalances that, if we can address through nutritional and lifestyle interventions, may help improve or ameliorate the condition? So risk factors is a tricky one. There isn't a huge amount of good quality research that has been done, but we do see that actually prenatal considerations come into this. So prematurity, so if we have a premature birth, if we have a low birth weight, if we are formula fed compared to being breastfed, or if our mothers were given an estrogen medication that gets shortened to DES, we have increased risk of going on to develop endometriosis. Now, DES was prescribed between 1940 and 1971. So bear in mind that this is no longer really a consideration for younger females, shall we say. Signs and symptoms, though, can be everything from painful menstruation to heavy or irregular periods, pain in the lower abdomen, spotting or bleeding between periods. And then we see gastrointestinal symptoms, bloating, constipation, nausea, fatigue and lethargy can be common symptoms. And that can go towards fainting, painful intercourse, or infertility. But as we mentioned earlier, 20 to 25% of women are actually asymptomatic. So it's a tricky condition to diagnose. Despite multiple theories explaining the cause of endometriosis, every concept suggests that this condition is a complex, multifactorial disease. Its development and progression are influenced by our genes, our immune system, our hormonal system, and environmental factors. And I've included in this quote microbial, because there's an increasing amount of research connecting our microbiome to endometriosis as well. So when we think that endometriosis is considered this complex multifactorial condition, it makes sense that a functional medicine approach may be helpful, because ultimately a functional medicine approach is a multi-pronged approach. It is a good paradigm when approaching conditions that are multifactorial in origin. So let's look at some of the associated imbalances that really help us start to understand what we might need to consider from a lifestyle and nutrition perspective to improve this condition. Well, one of the absolute foundations to good human health, whether we're talking about hormonal health, immune health, gut health, neurological health, whatever it may be, is a healthy circadian rhythm. This is something that I've discussed before in webinars. We have some great resources on our YouTube channel and on our podcast that you can listen to as well to understand this more. But the research has shown us that circadian disruption is associated with lower levels of melatonin and a higher risk of endometriosis. So for those of you that aren't yet familiar with this term, circadian rhythm is really our 24-hour body clock. Our entire physiology is, or should be, dictated by the fact that we live by a light-dark cycle. So we can start to see that some of the therapeutic interventions that we are going to discuss are around how can we entrain, how can we develop or cultivate a really healthy circadian rhythm, which is going to optimize our levels of melatonin, which many people know it as our sleep hormone, but actually it's also one of the most potent antioxidants in the human body. And we'll see that endometriosis is strongly associated with oxidative stress. And the balance between our antioxidants and oxidative stress is therefore paramount when we're talking about this condition. So as well as thinking about our circadian rhythm, which we'll expand on in the second half of the webinar, we can also think about the microbiome. So it has been discussed in the research that some gut bacteria might promote endometriosis, whereas others might actually have a protective property to them. And the bacteria that have a protective property to them are primarily our bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids, such as butyrate, via the fermentation of our dietary fiber. So there are two takeaways here, really. One is that we potentially need appropriate amounts of dietary fiber. The other one is that we need to ensure that we have a healthy microbiome and we're able to produce, therefore, adequate amounts of these short-chain fatty acids. Short-chain fatty acids are just metabolites produced by some of our bacteria, and they're produced via the fermentation of fiber. Butyrate, which is one of the short-chain fatty acids and the primary short-chain fatty acids, there's a slightly different or a subtype of butyrate called isobutyrate that we can actually produce a lot of on a ketogenic diet as well. So there's some really interesting discussion around a ketogenic diet from a gut health perspective. So ketogenic diets might promote good levels of some of these short-chain fatty acids, but also plenty of dietary fiber is also going to support this. In other research, we see imbalances in the ratio between two families of bacteria, the Firmicutes and the Bacteroidetes. A healthy balance indicates a healthy microbiome. An imbalance in this ratio is really one of the ways that we might define dysbiosis or an imbalance in our gut microbiome. There's also some research that came out a couple of years ago indicating intestinal permeability with endometriosis, aka leaky gut. So the integrity of our gut lining is also really important when it comes to this condition, endometriosis. And there's obviously a very intimate connection between an imbalance within our microbiome and the integrity of the gut lining. So we really need a healthy microbiome. We need healthy amounts of butyrate, the short-chain fatty acids, to maintain a healthy gut lining. The good news is all of these things can be tested for in various gut tests. So we can look at the butyrate producing bacteria to see whether we have enough of them. We can look at the ratio between the Firmicutes and the Bacteroidetes, this sort of seesaw balance that is a sign of balance or imbalance. And we can look at fecal zonulin, among other markers that can give us a really good indication of the integrity of the gut lining and whether someone may have active intestinal permeability or leaky gut or not. There's also research, though, connecting endometriosis as an autoimmune condition or individuals with endometriosis having other autoimmune diseases. So this makes sense when we start to think that there is an immunological or immune system-based connection with endometriosis. And as just one example, thyroid autoimmunity has been associated with this condition. So you could argue if you've been diagnosed with endometriosis, you want to make sure that you've had your thyroid antibodies tested to rule out or rule in a thyroid autoimmune condition. It's worth highlighting that there's an intimate connection between your thyroids and your sex hormones. So thyroid hormones not only indirectly affect the synthesis, the secretion and action of things like estrogen and progesterone, but they're also regulated by these hormones. Our physiology is a very deep, interconnected web. All of our bodily systems are interconnected. And we have to start appreciating that our hormones, to some degree, are often interconnected. So an imbalance in thyroid function may impact sex hormone status and vice versa. Now, we've already touched on oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is really related to when there's an imbalance in what we refer to as reactive oxygen species and antioxidants. So keeping this really simple, we have our antioxidants that either we're producing inside our bodies or we're consuming in food or supplement form, vitamin C, vitamin A, vitamin E as examples. Reactive oxygen species are produced from the fact that we utilize oxygen as a way to create energy. So these things are a natural thing that we produce in our body, and they get quenched, they get balanced via our antioxidants. If there is an imbalance within this sort of seesaw, that can promote endometriosis, and oxidative stress, this imbalance between antioxidants and reactive oxygen species, is associated with the majority of chronic health issues. So this is a fundamental concept really within health and disease. There's a lot of research showing us that in endometriosis, there is a high level of oxidative stress. There's an imbalance in the seesaw. And this is why, as we'll see later on, antioxidants have been shown to be very helpful in the condition, because if we increase our intake of antioxidants and we support our body's natural ability to produce antioxidants, we're helping balance the seesaw. That's going to help balance our immune system and ultimately help improve this condition and many other conditions. Now, we've mentioned that the microbiome has been connected with endometriosis. And we spoke about dysbiosis, which is more of like a generalized imbalance within the microbiome. But we also see research indicating that specific infections have been associated with endometriosis. There are specific bacteria and viruses found sometimes in stool, but also in blood and other bodily fluids that indicate that infections might actually contribute to the growth of endometriotic tissue. And it goes without saying that this condition contributes to significant psycho-emotional stress, partly because of the chronic pain, the uncertainty, and potentially the infertility that can develop. One of the challenges and the problems is that psycho-emotional stress that we can experience as a result of the condition can actually exacerbate the same imbalances in physiology that contribute to the development of endometriosis, meaning that we can get in a very vicious cycle. And this is so true for so many different conditions. You could even just talk about basic, so to speak, digestive issues like bloating, constipation, people diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome, whereby any condition that is debilitating and challenging is going to lead to psycho-emotional distress, which then often will exacerbate the condition via some sort of mechanism. So in the research, they've kind of discussed, is stress a cause or a consequence? And it's ultimately both, as is often the case. And we can't ignore hormone metabolism, which is, again, a real foundation within endometriosis. We mentioned at the beginning, part of the definition of this condition is that it is an estrogen-dependent condition. And therefore, we have to consider what might be contributing to an imbalance within estrogen and progesterone. Why is someone in a slightly more estrogen-dominant state? And again, we'll explore some of this in the upcoming slides. One of the reasons why someone might be in an estrogen dominant state is because we're all being exposed to an increasing number of endocrine disrupting chemicals. And more research is showing us that we do live in quite a toxic world. There are more and more chemicals that we are being exposed to, and some of these have been referred to as endocrine disrupting, endocrine hormonal. They are hormone disrupting chemicals. Some of them have estrogen activity, which are consensus ultimately. And one of the conclusions was we found some evidence to suggest an association between phthalate esters, bisphenol A found in things like plastics, organochlorinated environmental pollutants, and the prevalence of endometriosis. So we have to be mindful of our exposures to these endocrine disrupting chemicals. One of the takeaways here is we need to minimize our use of plastics. So as a really simple example, if you commute to work and at the train station every morning, you buy yourself a cup of coffee and you are drinking it through that plastic cup and the plastic lids, you are exposing yourself to very low levels of endocrine disrupting chemicals. That done every day over 5 decades, along with all the other exposures that we are exposed to, is how we accumulate these environmental toxins over time. And a very simple swap would be just to have your own coffee mug that you get filled every morning. Choose a glass one or a ceramic one or something essentially that is going to be low in some of these toxins. So we've covered the main imbalances that have been found and discussed in the research on endometriosis. So we're really summarizing this as there are imbalances within our gut microbiome and other microbiomes for that matter, maybe the vaginal microbiome, for example. There is systemic, often inflammation, which is caused by some of the imbalances that we've discussed. Oxidative stress is a really big one. This seesaw balance between antioxidants and these reactive oxygen species that we naturally produce as a result of essentially being alive and utilizing oxygen. So it's this balance which is important. It's not trying to reduce, it's not trying to sort of eliminate our production of these species. It's a matter of balance. Our environment is a big one in regards to toxins that we're exposed to. So there are many things that we can do based on this research to get improvement in this condition. And starting from the top of the list, we mentioned our circadian rhythm. This is our 24-hour body clock. Ways that we can improve our 24-hour body clock, our circadian rhythm, is trying to ensure that we get outside in the morning. If we can, particularly at sunrise, allowing your eyes and ideally some of your skin to be exposed to that redness of the sun at sunrise has an increasing amount of research behind it as in training our circadian rhythm. In the research, they talk about Zeitgeibers. These are environmental stimuli that are telling our brain what time of day it is. By that process occurring, our brain is then sending a message to all of the cells in our body that specific things should be turning on, turning off, winding up, winding down. Light is the primary stimuli for our physiology to function optimally. The World Health Organization have showed us that 90% of our lives are now spent inside, and it is being discussed in the research as a genuine concern for human health. We have evolved over millennia outside, and although it might sound silly, one of the best things you can do for your health is to try and get outside as much as possible and use sunrise and sunset as two of the most important times to get outside. The midday sun would be another opportunity, but really the takeaway message is get outside as much as you can. Allow natural full spectrum light through your eyes and on your skin, and this will help all sorts of different conditions. Limit your caffeine in the afternoon, limit your alcohol in the afternoon or evening, and limit artificial light at night. This gets referred to as ALAN in the research. This is the light being emitted from all of our technology and most of our lamps and lights that we have in our homes. There are different things we can consider. There's a company called Blue Light, Blue Light Blocking UK, I think it is. They offer various different types of bulbs, but they also sell blue light blocking glasses. These are glasses that you wear from sunset And you might look a little bit strange wearing them because often they'll have a very orangey red lens to them, but they're literally blocking the light being emitted from your TV, your iPad, your iPhone, tablet, etc. And we know that exposing ourselves to this blue light, this artificial light, suppresses melatonin production, which we now know is not just a sleep hormone, but a potent antioxidant. It helps balance that seesaw that we discussed on the topic of oxidative stress. Try not to exercise in the evenings. Certainly don't do high intensity exercise. If you can, exercise earlier in the day. If you have to exercise at night, I would encourage lower intensity exercise to support the mind and the body winding down at the end of the day. Another big one is time restrictive feeding. Try and eat ideally within a 12-hour eating window, meaning if you have breakfast at 7:30, try and have had your dinner by 7:30. Research has also shown that eating more of your calories earlier in the day can be helpful as a way to support metabolic health and circadian rhythm. So that saying, which I always forget, but it starts with eat like a king, eat breakfast like a king, eat lunch, etc. That saying, that's actually something that many of us should consider following. One of the problems I see in clinic is that so many of us skip breakfast. And I think it's just because it's convenient, isn't it? We grab our coffee and we get out the house on our way to work, dropping off the kids at school and things like this. But actually, the research suggests we may be better off really prioritizing breakfast, having a lighter dinner. Many of us may be needing to bring our dinner earlier into the evening when possible as well. All of these things have a significant impact on our circadian rhythm. But by far the most important, morning sunshine, limit artificial light at night by doing things like wearing your blue light blocking glasses, and restrict your foods within a certain time frame, ideally a 12-hour window, so you have, so to speak, a 12-hour fast overnight. Now, nutrition can really play a big role here, and for different reasons. Plants are a great source of bioactive compounds, things like polyphenols, flavonoids. There are lots of different compounds in plants that we know provide health benefits. And lots of these different plant bioactive compounds work on some of the pathways that have been discussed as contributing to endometriosis. So changing dietary patterns to incorporate more color, more fiber, more plants in the diet may help reduce inflammation, which is shown, as we mentioned earlier, to be increased in endometriosis. But it also may help reduce prostaglandins, which have a mechanism whereby they contribute to pain in endometriosis. So there's lots of different mechanisms. These are just 2 or 3 examples showing us that polyphenols in our diet, which primarily come from lots of colorful fruit and vegetables, have a role to play within improving endometriosis through endometriosis specific pathways such as prostaglandins, estrogen metabolism, because remember, endometriosis is an estrogen dependent condition. Okay, and this kind of summarizes those 3 pathways. So, associations, and we do need to be mindful of this. It is not causation, it is only association. But diets rich in fruit and vegetables that follow a kind of a Mediterranean diet framework, green tea consumption, vitamin D, and plant-derived natural compounds may reduce the risk of endometriosis, whereas some research suggests that fats, certainly saturated fats and red meat, alcohol and coffee may contribute to their development. This is a direct quote from this research. I do want to mention that other research has shown us that coffee isn't connected with endometriosis. So don't feel that you have to avoid it if you like it. It may not be this black or white rule that you have to follow, but certainly alcohol we want to be considering, and we really want to be making sure that when we're consuming red meat from a dietary perspective, we've got appropriate levels of polyphenols and fiber in the diet as well. So I don't necessarily wholeheartedly agree with this comment or this quote, because we can't we can't talk about one component of the diet without thinking about the rest of the diet. So can we say that red meat contributes to the development of endometriosis without thinking about the rest of the diet? If you're consuming red meat, but there's plenty of polyphenols, like we've just discussed, you're drinking green tea, your vitamin D status is good, etc., it really likely isn't going to be a significant contributor. So we have to take that holistic approach to our diet overall. Now, some of the plant compounds that have been studied specifically in endometriosis are these. Quercetin, in one study, 200 milligrams was per day for 3 months, showed benefit. Rosmarinic acid, which is from rosemary. There isn't a study that I have found, but basically adding some rosemary to your diet may be helpful. This could be in supplement form, but I would encourage you just to add rosemary to any dishes where it's appropriate. There's actually a study where people added rosemary to their coffee. And all you have to do is add it to your ground coffee before you pour your water over it, if you use that sort of filter, or add it to your cafetiere. Let it sort of soak for a few minutes, and you're going to extract some of these plant compounds from the rosemary. Genistein from sort of soy-based products. ECGC is an extract or a component of green tea. You can get this in supplement form. In one study, 400 milligrams twice a day for 3 months was helpful. Curcumin, 42 milligrams twice a day for 4 months was helpful. Some studies do go quite a bit higher. And resveratrol, 400 milligrams twice daily for 12 to 14 weeks. So curcumin is found in turmeric. So can you add turmeric to some of your meals? A homemade curry, for example. I add turmeric powder to smoothies as a way to get more curcumin into my diet. Can you drink green tea on a regular basis? You might not necessarily get to this specific dose, but again, it's still going to be beneficial. If you're not on any medications, if you don't have any other health concerns, these are fairly safe interventions, I would say. But as always, I would say speak to your indications here. But these are evidence-based plant compounds for endometriosis. Now, antioxidants, we've kind of touched on this quite a lot already. The previous slide, most of those plant compounds have antioxidant properties. And the research, a systematic review out this year, shows us that there are promising results for the use of antioxidants in endometriosis-related pain. Further research showing us that these plant compounds can be helpful. Curcumin, quercetin, and resveratrol in this systematic review, again, out this year. So we've got a lot of very recent research showing us the benefits of supplementing these antioxidants, these plant compounds in this condition. Now, I'm going to skim over these slides a little bit, just because the takeaway really is that we want to be mindful of these nutrients in our diet, and where appropriate, we can obviously consider supplementation. Now, vitamin A has been shown to be helpful. Vitamin A, especially in its pre-vitamin form, meaning retinoic acid, and that is found primarily in organ meats such as liver. So I recommend to all of my clients, where appropriate, to try and consume some liver once or twice a week, because it is often referred to as nature's multivitamin. Now, I appreciate there are lots of different reasons why someone might not choose to consume liver, and therefore the next best thing is going to be considering cod liver oil. And if that can't be had, then we can only get vitamin A from our plant foods. But not all of us have a very good ability to convert that vitamin A in plant food, like beta carotene, as well as others, to retinoic acid. Hence my recommendation that if you can, consume some organ meats on a weekly basis. It is an absolutely fantastic source of vitamin A, along with many other nutrients, such as the B vitamins as well. Vitamin D, if you haven't had your vitamin D levels tested for recently, that might be worth considering. Vitamin D has been strongly associated with endometriosis. Zinc. Zinc can be found, the best source is oysters. It will be found in red meat as well, among other foods. Although there are no studies looking at the supplementation of zinc, researchers have found that dietary intake of zinc in women with endometriosis was higher compared to women, without endometriosis was higher compared to women with endometriosis. So there's observational research showing us that zinc consumption is helpful here. Also, zinc is a well-known antioxidant, which takes us back to the oxidative stress concept. NAC is an antioxidant that you can get in supplement form. This has been shown to be helpful for women with endometriosis as well. Butyrate, we've already touched on this when we spoke about the microbiome. You don't necessarily have to supplement butyrate, although you can. Remember that our bacteria produce it via the fermentation of dietary fiber. You can also supplement prebiotics. There's a prebiotic called PHGG, partially hydrolyzed guar gum, PHGG, that has been shown to increase the butyrate producing bacteria, and therefore in theory will support improvement in the production of butyrate. Butyrate also is essential in modulating our immune system and maintaining a healthy gut lining, both of which have been connected with endometriosis. We just mentioned the role that prebiotics can play here. Prebiotics can support a healthy microbiome. Certain prebiotics support the production of butyrate, and butyrate is something that we all need appropriate amounts of for a healthy gut and a healthy immune system and a healthy gut lining. We can obviously get our prebiotics in food form, which is how we should prioritize them. Vegetables like garlic, leeks, and onion, fruits such as apples and bananas, and other things like honey, dark chocolate or cocoa, legumes, chia seeds, flax seeds in moderation will all have prebiotic properties here. Probiotics, a study out last year showed us that the evidence, although preliminary, does demonstrate that they can be of benefit in endometriosis. Probiotics can help heal a leaky gut lining. They can help modulate the microbiome. They can help heal the gut lining, but they also modulate the immune system. So they can have anti-inflammatory properties as well. Now, probiotic foods, again, should be the way we prioritize this. Kefir, sauerkraut, kombucha, kimchi, cultured yogurts. You know, you can have 4 or 5 strains of bacteria by consuming yogurts. Some kefir products will give you up to 25, 26 different strains of probiotic. That's a really healthy dose of bacteria that you're getting, and arguably might be a cheaper way than having to purchase a supplement on a regular basis. Fermented foods like these have been shown to improve microbiome diversity. Magnesium may be helpful in women with endometriosis. Omega-3 can be helpful. Omega-3 is anti-inflammatory. It supports the microbiome, the gut lining, and it's been shown to reduce pain in women and adolescent women with endometriosis. We've mentioned ECGC from green tea already. And selenium is another potent antioxidant. You know, Brazil nuts are the classic example of a food that is a good source of selenium. It will also be found, I believe, in certain meats as well as grains as well. Acupuncture can be very helpful. And mindfulness, going back to that slide earlier where we discussed this bidirectional vicious cycle that we can get in between stress being caused by endometriosis and stress causing endometriosis, it's interesting to see that a mindfulness-based intervention is actually beneficial in reducing pain in women with endometriosis. So any form of mindfulness-based practice arguably could be helpful if you're struggling with pain. But again, mindfulness-based training has been shown to improve IBS-type conditions, and therefore we suspect, or at least I suspect, might help from a sort of microbiome, immune, gut-brain sort of perspective as well. And then I think finally, or getting close to finally, if not, we always need to be mindful of detoxification capacity. You know, if we think of endometriosis as a estrogen dominant state, an estrogen dependent condition, then we need to be thinking about how are you detoxifying or metabolizing your estrogen. And for that, we need to think about gut and liver health. For that, we've spoken quite a lot about gut health and the role that the microbiome plays in prebiotic and probiotic foods. We've spoken about dietary fiber and how that can support butyrate production. But sulfurous vegetables, things like broccoli, cabbage, and pre and probiotic foods will be really helpful here. You can also consider supplements. Sulforaphane, indole 3-carbinol, and DIM are often discussed as being helpful, but I would only recommend you utilize these if you have done some hormonal testing and have been recommended them, because there are situations where you may not want to actually be supplementing these. So it is, again, has to be done on an individual basis. Obviously, limit alcohol and manage your stress. This is actually a way that we can support detoxification. And there are genetics or genes that come into play here. So some of us may be genetically predisposed to not detoxifying estrogen as well as others, and therefore may need a little bit more support. That can come through dietary and lifestyle measures. But if we've been diagnosed and our health isn't optimal, then we can start to tailor supplementation around some of those genetic predispositions as well, potentially. So thank you for listening, everyone.